The road appears first as a line where no line should be, a pale scar running across the hard earth with a confidence that feels almost unnatural. It does not wander like an animal track, or bend like a path made slowly by tired feet. It holds its course. It cuts over the open ground as if someone stood above the world, drew a decision across the land, and ordered the stones, soil, and human bodies beneath it to obey. Around it, the landscape seems almost empty. Wind moves through dust. Low hills rise and fade in the heat. Scrub clings where it can. Nothing announces a city. Nothing rises like a monument. There are no crowded markets, no smoke from cooking fires, no children running beside pack animals, no watchmen calling from walls. Only the road remains, too deliberate to be accidental, too well made to belong to people who did not understand exactly what they were doing. And that is where the unease begins. Roads are not just objects. Roads are promises. They imply footsteps, traffic, authority, memory, and a reason to go somewhere. A road says that one place mattered enough to connect it to another. It says there were hands to clear it, minds to measure it, leaders or customs strong enough to organize it, and a community confident enough to believe that tomorrow would still need the same direction as today. Yet here, along these long straight traces, the promise seems broken. The builders are gone. Their settlements are quiet. Their names, if they had one for themselves that survives in any reliable form, have slipped out of reach. What remains in the record suggests not a fantasy kingdom swallowed in a single magical night, but something stranger and more haunting, a real people, capable of impressive planning, who built a world of movement across difficult land, and then left so little behind that later observers could mistake absence for instant disappearance. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story of a vanished road-building people is not really about stone and dirt alone. It is about how human beings try to defeat distance, how landscapes remember what people forget, and how a civilization can leave behind its infrastructure long after its voice has fallen silent. The first impression is precision. Many ancient roads, especially those crossing open or arid terrain, can look startlingly direct. Some run across flats, climb slopes, pass over ridges, or point toward distant features with a stubbornness that seems almost mathematical. To a modern eye, used to roads shaped by engines and surveying instruments, it is tempting to assume a technology behind them that was far beyond its time. But archaeology usually tells a quieter, more human story. Ancient builders did not need satellites to make straight roads. They needed sightlines, repeated labour, landmarks, social organisation, and a belief that the road mattered. A team could align a route by watching distant peaks, setting markers, clearing vegetation, scraping surfaces, laying stones, or building edges that caught the light. What looks impossible from the ground often becomes understandable when seen as the product of patience repeated over generations. Still, understanding how such roads could be made does not make them less mysterious. In some ways, it makes them more powerful. The perfection is not evidence of lost machines or visitors from beyond the sky, despite what popular speculation sometimes tries to sell. It is evidence of human concentration. It means someone cared enough to impose order on a resisting landscape. It means the road was not merely a convenience, it was part of a system. The land itself gives the first clue. Civilizations that build major roads rarely do so in easy places for no reason. They build them where movement is difficult, where water is unevenly distributed, where resources lie far apart, where ritual centres pull people from distant settlements, where trade goods must pass from valley to coast or from highland to plain. A road through harsh country can be an economic artery, but also a spiritual corridor, a political statement, and a survival tool. It can carry salt, shells, obsidian, grain, copper, cloth, feathers, timber, news, marriage ties, sacred objects, and the dead. It can also carry fear. The same line that allows merchants and pilgrims to travel can allow raiders, refugees, tax collectors, soldiers, or desperate families to move with terrible speed. The vanished people at the heart of this story are best approached not as a single solved identity, but as a composite mystery grounded in real patterns known from archaeology, road builders of ancient arid lands, makers of ceremonial paths, desert traders, highland engineers, and communities whose physical achievements outlived their languages. Scholars still debate how much some ancient road systems were used for ordinary transport, how much for ritual movement, and how much for political display. The evidence remains incomplete because roads are exposed things. Wind scours them, floods cut them. Later people reuse them, erase them, or mistake them for natural features. A wall can collapse in one place and still be recognized. A road can vanish by becoming too familiar to notice. In the beginning, there is no disappearance. There is only adaptation. Imagine small communities scattered across a demanding terrain, each settlement tied to water, shelter, seasonal food, and the fragile balance between staying and moving. People learn the land through repetition. They know which dry channels may flash with water after storms, which plants survive in bad years, which ridges give safe passage, which salt flats deceive the eye, which stars rise over the direction of home. Their earliest paths are not monumental. They are memory pressed into ground, a track to a spring, a route to a burial place, a seasonal trail between camps, a line used by hunters, traders, families, and messengers long before anyone decides to formalize it. Then, gradually, habit becomes architecture. A path that matters is cleared, a dangerous crossing is marked, stones are moved, edges appear. A route used for one generation becomes inherited by the next. The road ceases to be only a trail and becomes a cultural object, something maintained because the community recognizes itself in it. This is the quiet threshold where a people begin to build not merely for the present journey, but for a world they expect to continue. There is a lesser-known detail. In many ancient landscapes, some of the most impressive roads do not always connect the places modern observers expect. They may not run neatly between the largest ruins. They may lead toward shrines, water sources, astronomical alignments, cemeteries, quarries, or places that have no obvious practical value today. This can be frustrating if one expects roads to behave like modern highways. But ancient movement was not always divided between the practical and the sacred. Carrying goods, honouring ancestors, making offerings, visiting distant kin, gathering for ceremonies, and proving loyalty to a centre could all belong to the same act of travel. A road could be useful because it was holy, and holy because it was useful. That double meaning is important, because it explains why the roads could be so carefully made even where traffic seems unlikely. Their precision may have been a form of authority. A straight road says that the builders were not merely responding to the land, they were commanding a relationship with it. They were making visible a shared order. In a world without modern maps, a road could be a map laid directly onto the earth. And yet, the silence around these roads remains. The vanished people do not step forward easily. They hide behind fragments, pottery styles, tool marks, settlement patterns, food remains, burials, quarry scars, post holes, hearth ash, bones, pollen, charcoal, and the patient measurements of archaeologists kneeling in dust. No single explanation fully accounts for what happened to every community that ever left behind a road and then faded from view. Some may have declined slowly. Some may have migrated. Some may have been absorbed by neighbours. Some may have lost their old centres but survived under new names. The idea that they vanished overnight is almost certainly a compression of memory, the way later generations turn long collapse into a single dramatic moment, because the human mind prefers a scene to a process. But there may have been a night when someone did leave, a final cooking fire, a door covered against dust, a child lifted before dawn, a load too heavy to carry, abandoned beside a route once built for abundance. In the archaeological record, human decisions often appear as gaps. A settlement is occupied, then it is not. A road is maintained, then sand begins to gather. A shrine receives offerings, then silence. The lives inside the change are mostly invisible. So the story begins with that contradiction, roads built to endure, and people who did not remain. Perfect lines across a broken landscape, engineering without a surviving voice, a system of movement that outlived the society that gave it meaning. To follow these roads is to move backward from absence into presence, from the empty desert into a time when the same ground was known, named, crossed, feared, and loved. The first mystery is not how the people disappeared. It is how they became strong enough, organized enough, and certain enough to draw such lines across the world in the first place. Long before the roads become visible from high ridges or from the cold eye of modern survey, there is only the land and the human need to understand it. The people who will one day cut these confident lines across the earth do not begin as master engineers. They begin as watchers of weather, keepers of roots, readers of stone, wind, water, animal movement, and hunger. Their world is not empty to them. It is full of signs. A dry basin that seems lifeless to a stranger may hold seasonal seeds after rare rain. A cliff face may offer shade at the hour when heat becomes dangerous. A slope of broken rock may mark a pass known only to those who have crossed it since childhood. What later explorers call wilderness is, for them, a lived map. At first, survival depends on attention more than ambition. Small communities settle where the landscape allows them to settle, often near water that is reliable enough to anchor memory. In harsh regions, a spring is not just a resource. It is a reason for stories, boundaries, obligations, and conflict. A patch of fertile ground, a stand of trees, a sheltered hollow, or a seasonal stream can shape generations of human movement. Families learn when to plant, when to gather, when to leave, and when to return. Their lives may not look monumental from a distance, but they contain the first ingredients of civilization-repeated cooperation, inherited knowledge, shared labour, and a sense that some places matter more than others. The evidence for such early worlds is often quiet. Archaeologists find broken pottery where meals were cooked, stone tools near work areas, charred seeds, animal bones, post holes from vanished shelters, grinding stones worn smooth by countless hands, and layers of ash that mark ordinary fires rather than dramatic destruction. What survives in the record suggests people adapting to a demanding environment with skill rather than merely enduring it. They are not passive victims of climate or geography. They make choices, they experiment, They remember good years and bad ones. They learn which risks can be survived and which cannot. One surprising detail about ancient road-building societies is that their earliest power often grows out of limitation. Where movement is easy, routes may remain informal for a long time. Where movement is difficult, paths become precious. In a landscape broken by dry valleys, mountains, deserts, canyons, marshes, or scattered resources, the ability to move safely becomes a form of wealth. A community that knows the best crossing, guards a water source, controls a pass, or maintains a dependable trail can become important without building a palace. Geography gives them a problem, and the solution becomes social. This is how paths begin to gather meaning. A trail to water becomes a trail to neighbours. A trail to neighbours becomes a route for exchange. Exchange brings objects from beyond the horizon, and those objects change the imagination of a people. A shell from the coast appears in an inland settlement. A stone blade made from distant volcanic glass turns up far from its source. A mineral pigment travels from one valley to another. Such objects are small, but they carry enormous implications. They prove that the world is larger than the local horizon. They prove that someone can go out, return, and bring back something strange. Over time, movement creates relationships that are not visible in ruins alone. Marriage ties may link settlements miles apart. Ritual obligations may require people to visit places their grandparents visited. Seasonal gatherings may bring dispersed communities together for ceremonies, trade, storytelling, alliance, and courtship. Children grow up hearing of places they have not yet seen but are expected to know. Elders become living archives of direction, a bend in the land, a distant peak, a particular stone, a place where a traveller once died, all become part of the route. The road, before it is a road, is therefore a chain of human memory. It is not invented in a single decision. It thickens with use. Feet compress soil. Animals widen the passage. People clear branches or stones not because they are founding an empire, but because the next journey will be easier. At some point, a route becomes too important to remain accidental. Someone marks it. Someone repairs it after rain. Someone argues that it should be kept open. The community begins to treat the path as a shared possession. Yet there is another pressure working beneath the surface uncertainty. Ancient environments were rarely stable in the way later myths imagine. Rainfall could shift. Rivers could change course. Soils could thin. Forests could retreat. Herds could move away. A settlement that prospers for 3 generations might suddenly face a decade of poor harvests. Scholars still debate the exact timing and severity of environmental stress in many ancient collapses, but the larger pattern is clear enough. Societies in marginal lands often live with a narrow margin between abundance and crisis. That margin teaches discipline. It encourages storage, cooperation, signalling, exchange, and long-distance relationships. If one valley fails, another may still have grain. If one spring dries, another may hold. If one settlement suffers, kin elsewhere may help. Roads are born from this logic as much as from ambition. They are insurance written on the ground. They allow people to move food, information, ritual authority, and hope through a landscape where no single place is always safe. The people themselves remain difficult to see as individuals. Their names do not survive, or survive only through later labels given by outsiders, archaeologists, or neighbouring cultures. This absence can create the illusion of emptiness, but that illusion is dangerous. A society without readable texts is not a society without thought. It may have had complex oral histories, songs, genealogies, laws, warnings, origin stories, and sacred geographies, all transmitted through memory rather than ink. When such a culture collapses or transforms, the loss can be almost total. Stone remains, speech disappears. In this early phase, there may be no central capital, no single king, no unified state in the familiar sense. There may instead be clusters of communities, ritual centres, influential lineages, craft specialists, traders, farmers, herders, priests, or leaders whose authority depends on season, ceremony, and control of key places. No single explanation fully accounts for how such communities become capable of major construction, because different societies organize labor in different ways. Some rely on coercion, others on obligation, religion, feasting, alliance, prestige, or collective survival. The road can be built by command, but it can also be built by belief. And belief matters. A landscape is never only physical. Mountains can be ancestors, springs can be gifts, caves can be entrances to other worlds, directions can carry ritual meaning. Straightness itself may symbolize order, purity, connection, or power. What appears to a modern engineer as efficient alignment may also have been a sacred gesture. The evidence remains incomplete, but many ancient route systems suggest that practical travel and ceremonial movement were deeply entangled. A road could bring people to food and also to the dead. It could carry trade goods and also offerings. It could connect settlements and also bind the living to a story of who they were. So before the perfect roads, there is a long apprenticeship in place. The builders learn the world by moving through it. They learn that distance can kill, but also that distance can be mastered. They learn that a path used often enough becomes memory, and memory maintained long enough becomes infrastructure. The later mystery of disappearance begins here, not with collapse, but with confidence slowly earned. A people who know every danger of their landscape begin to believe they can organize it. They begin to turn routes into lines, lines into systems, and systems into something that may outlast them. At some point, the path stops being something people simply follow and becomes something they deliberately shape. The change is subtle at first, almost invisible in the archaeological record, but it marks a turning point in how a society understands itself. A trail worn by feet becomes a route defined by intention. Stones are moved not just out of the way, but into place. Edges are marked, surfaces are cleared. The line is no longer just remembered, it is enforced. The geometry of survival begins here, in difficult terrain. Efficiency is not an abstract idea. It is the difference between reaching water before exhaustion, between arriving with enough food to trade or enough strength to return. A longer, winding path might avoid obstacles, but it costs time and energy. A straighter route, even if it climbs or crosses more exposed ground, can reduce distance and make movement predictable. Over generations, people begin to favor routes that feel deliberate, even if they are harder to create. The straight line becomes not just a convenience, but a strategy. Creating such a line requires coordination. One person cannot impose a road across miles of land. It takes groups working in sequence, clearing, aligning, and maintaining sections. This suggests more than just local effort. It implies communication between communities, shared goals, and some form of agreement about where the road should go and why it matters. The road becomes a social contract laid onto the earth. Each group maintains its part, but the whole only works if everyone participates. Water is often the hidden architect behind these decisions. In arid or semi-arid regions, Water sources are scattered and uneven. Springs, seasonal streams, hidden wells, and catchment areas become nodes in a network that must be connected. Roads align themselves between these nodes, linking life to life. Some routes may appear strangely direct until one realizes they're connecting two critical water points with minimal deviation. Others may bend unexpectedly, revealing the presence of a resource no longer visible today. Scholars still debate the full extent to which ancient roads were optimized for water access, but the pattern appears again and again in different regions where water is scarce. Movement becomes structured. Trade adds another layer as communities stabilize and begin to produce surplus grain, crafted goods, tools, textiles, pigments. They need reliable ways to exchange them. A trader moving through uncertain terrain needs more than memory. They need trust in the route. A defined road reduces risk. It signals that others have passed this way, that the path is known, that it leads somewhere meaningful. Over time, goods begin to flow along these lines, salt from dry basins, obsidian from volcanic regions, shells from distant coasts, metals from hidden deposits. Each object carries not just material value, but proof of connection. There is also a quieter, less obvious function of roads. They organize time. In a landscape without written calendars or clocks in the modern sense, travel itself can structure the year. Certain routes may be used in particular seasons, linking agricultural cycles, ritual gatherings, and trade events. A journey might take days or weeks, and its duration becomes part of the rhythm of life. The road is not just a line in space, it is a measure of time experienced through movement. Defense and control cannot be ignored either. A well-defined road allows for faster movement of people, which can be an advantage in times of conflict. It can enable a community to respond to threats, to send warnings, or to retreat if necessary. At the same time, roads can be controlled. Narrow passes, elevated routes, or marked corridors can be monitored, taxed, or defended. The same line that enables trade can also become a boundary of power. It can say, quietly but clearly, that this land is organized, watched, and claimed. Yet the most intriguing aspect of these early roads is how they blend the practical with the symbolic. In many ancient cultures, movement itself is a meaningful act. Walking a route may be part of a ritual, a reenactment of a myth, or a demonstration of belonging. Certain roads may lead to ceremonial sites where communities gather not just to exchange goods, but to reaffirm identity. The straightness of a road may carry significance beyond efficiency. It may represent order imposed on chaos, a connection between earthly and celestial directions, or a visible expression of unity. There is evidence in some regions that roads align with distant landmarks, such as mountain peaks or horizon points where the sun rises or sets at particular times of the year. These alignments are not always exact, and scholars still debate their intentionality, but the pattern suggests that road building could involve more than immediate needs. It could reflect a worldview in which landscape, sky, and society are interconnected. As the network grows, so does its complexity. Paths intersect, diverge, and reconnect. Some become major routes, maintained regularly and used by many. Others remain secondary, serving local needs or seasonal movements. The system begins to resemble a living organism, with arteries and smaller veins, all carrying the flow of people and resources. Maintaining such a system requires effort. Roads must be cleared after storms, repaired after erosion, marked where they fade. This maintenance is itself a form of labor organization, a sign that the society has enough stability and coordination to invest in the future. A lesser-known detail is that some ancient roads include features that go beyond simple pathways, raised edges, drainage channels, stepping stones, or even flattened surfaces created by repeated compaction. These features do not appear everywhere, but where they do, they indicate a level of care that goes beyond necessity. They suggest pride, perhaps even competition between communities to maintain the best section of the route. The road becomes a visible measure of participation in a larger system. At this stage, the people who build these roads are no longer just adapting to their environment, they are reshaping it in subtle but lasting ways. The landscape begins to bear the imprint of their decisions. Future travellers, even from entirely different cultures, will find these routes and follow them, often without knowing who first laid them down. The road becomes a kind of inheritance, passed not through words, but through ground. And yet, even as the system strengthens, it carries within it the seeds of vulnerability. The more a society depends on structured movement, the more it relies on the stability of the routes themselves. If a key path is disrupted by environmental change, conflict, or neglect, the effects can ripple outward. Trade slows, communication falters, ritual gatherings become harder to sustain. The network that once provided resilience can, under pressure, become a source of fragility. For now, though, the roads hold. They stretch across the land with quiet authority, linking water to settlement, settlement to shrine, shrine to distant horizon. They represent a collective belief that distance can be managed, that the future will resemble the present closely enough to justify the effort of maintenance. The people who walk them do not see mystery, they see familiarity. They know where the road leads, what lies along it, and why it matters. It is only later, when the footsteps stop, that the geometry begins to feel uncanny. A straight line without travellers is no longer just efficient, it becomes a question. The people behind the roads are difficult to name, and that difficulty shapes everything that can be said about them. A civilization with kings carved into stone, battles recorded on walls, and laws written in clay announces itself even after collapse. Its ruins speak in titles, dates, boasts, warnings, prayers, and inventories. But a people who leave roads without clear texts become a different kind of presence. They are visible everywhere and nowhere at once. Their work crosses the land with unmistakable confidence, yet their voices do not survive in a form modern scholars can easily read. They are not imaginary, but they are partly hidden behind the stubborn silence of things. That silence can be misleading. It is easy to look at a road, a settlement mound, a scatter of pottery, or a line of stones and underestimate the society that made them. Writing has a powerful hold on modern imagination. Cultures that wrote are often treated as more advanced, more real, more historically alive. But many complex societies preserved knowledge through memory, performance, landscape, and ritual rather than through durable inscriptions. Their histories may have been carried in songs, genealogies, ceremonies, root names, origin stories, and the trained minds of elders. Once those living systems break, the loss is severe. The stones remain, but the explanations are gone. Archaeology begins where speech fails. It studies what people did repeatedly enough to leave traces. The distribution of houses can suggest family structure. The size of storage pits can hint at surplus or insecurity. Burials may reveal status differences, though the evidence remains incomplete and must be handled carefully. Tool marks show techniques. Food remains show diet. Pollen and charcoal can suggest changing vegetation, farming, burning, or drought. Pottery styles can reveal contact between communities or the movement of ideas across long distances. Roads add one more layer. They show that these people thought beyond the individual settlement. They organize space. A people capable of maintaining a road network must have had some kind of social glue strong enough to coordinate labor. That does not necessarily mean an empire in the familiar sense. There may have been no single throne, no palace bureaucracy, no ruler whose command reached every village. Authority can take many forms. It can rest in religious specialists, lineage heads, councils, seasonal leaders, warrior groups, trading families, or ritual centers whose influence expands and contracts over time. What matters is not whether they had kings, but whether enough people accepted the obligation to build and maintain shared routes. The roads suggest that they did. Daily life around those roads would have been less mysterious and more human than the empty landscape now allows us to imagine. People woke to heat, or cold, hunger, or routine, family tensions, work, weather, illness, preparation, and memory. They ground grain or seeds on stones that slowly wore into shallow basins. They repaired tools, they carried water, they watched animals, they gathered fuel. They cooked in vessels whose broken fragments later become clues for strangers thousands of years removed. Children learned the names of directions before they learned the distances. Travellers arriving on the road brought news, objects, warnings, jokes, diseases, marriages, rumours of conflict, and perhaps stories of places so far away they seemed almost unreal. One lesser-known detail of many ancient route systems is how often roads preserve social relationships that would otherwise leave no trace. A pot can show style, a house can show occupation, but a road shows repeated connection. If two settlements are linked by a maintained path, something passed between them often enough to matter. It may have been grain, stone, cloth, water rights, ritual duty, marriage partners, or political allegiance. The road does not tell us which one by itself, but it tells us there was a relationship. In this sense, roads are among the most social artifacts humans create. The builders also had to understand labour at scale. Even a simple cleared road becomes a serious project when stretched across miles. People must decide where it runs, who clears it, who repairs it, who has the right to use it, and what happens when a section is neglected. If stones are placed along the edges, someone must gather and carry them. If surfaces are levelled, someone must scrape and compact the ground. If the route crosses slopes, washes, or unstable soil, builders must adapt. None of this requires modern engineering, but it does require accumulated skill. The precision is not a miracle, it is discipline made visible. Their beliefs are harder to reconstruct, but the roads themselves offer hints. A purely practical road usually follows convenience. A ceremonial road may follow meaning. When a route runs straight despite obstacles, or seems to point toward a mountain, a shrine, a horizon event, or a place of burial. Archaeologists must consider that the builders were not simply minimizing effort. They may have been creating an experience. To walk the road may have been to move through a sacred order, to approach a center correctly, to reenact a story, or to participate in a shared identity that stretched far beyond one village. Scholars still debate how much can be inferred from alignment alone. A straight road pointing toward a mountain may be intentional, or it may be coincidence in a landscape full of visible peaks. A route that appears astronomical may reflect careful observation, or modern pattern seeking. The responsible answer is often cautious. Some alignments are probably meaningful, some are uncertain, and some may be illusions created by incomplete evidence. But caution does not erase the larger point. For many ancient peoples, the practical and the sacred were not separate categories. A road could be useful because it carried people to a ritual center, and sacred because generations had used it to do exactly that. The absence of written self-description also complicates the question of identity. Were these road builders one people, or many communities participating in a shared system? Did they speak one language, or several? Did they see themselves as members of a single culture, or as local groups bound together by trade, marriage, and ceremony? The material record can suggest patterns, but it rarely answers such questions cleanly. Pottery similarities may imply shared traditions, but not necessarily shared language. Common road forms may indicate coordination, but not necessarily political unity. What survives in the record suggests connection, but connection is not always the same as central control. This is why the phrase "a lost people" must be handled carefully. They were not lost to themselves. They knew who they were. They knew the names of their settlements, ancestors, sacred places, enemies, allies, and roads. The loss belongs to us, and to history's uneven memory. Later cultures may have remembered them under different names, absorbed their descendants, reused their roads, or transformed their stories beyond recognition. By the time outsiders looked back and wondered who had built the lines across the land, the original answers may already have been scattered. And still, there are glimpses. A repaired stretch of road suggests maintenance after damage. A cluster of offerings near a route suggests repeated ritual. A change in pottery along a corridor suggests new contacts or shifting influence. A settlement placed at a crossroads suggests someone understood the power of position. A road that continues past ordinary habitation toward a stark ceremonial feature suggests that movement itself held meaning. These clues are small, but together they create a society with texture practical, organized, observant, and capable of turning geography into identity. The mystery then is not that such people existed. Human history is full of societies whose complexity was underestimated because they did not leave the kind of monuments later observers expected. The real mystery is how a culture with enough cohesion to maintain such a network could become so difficult to trace afterward. Roads are durable, but social worlds are not. Names can vanish. Languages can dissolve. Ritual meanings can be forgotten. Descendants can survive while identities change. A people can disappear from history without every person dying. For now, the roads still carry them, not as portraits, not as royal inscriptions, not as heroic legends, but as movement frozen in place. Each line says that people crossed here often enough to make the earth remember. Each cleared stretch implies hands, feet, decisions, and belief. The builders may be nameless to us, but they were not vague. They lived in houses, worried over harvests, buried their dead, watched the sky, argued over obligations, and walked these roads with destinations in mind. Their world was not a mystery while it was alive. It only became one after the walking stopped. As the roads lengthen, the society behind them begins to look less like a scattering of settlements and more like a world with a shared pulse. A single path can be explained by need. A few paths can be explained by habit, but a network, especially one that crosses difficult terrain with repeated attention to direction, surface, and destination, suggests something larger. It suggests that the builders are not merely solving local problems anymore. They're imagining distance as something that can be governed. From a high place, the pattern would have been easier to understand than it is from the ground. One line runs across a plain toward a low pass. Another climbs from a settlement cluster toward a ridge where the horizon opens. Another connects water to habitation, habitation to a ceremonial place, and ceremonial place to a more distant corridor. Some stretches may be broad enough for groups to move together. Others may narrow where the land forces them inward. In certain places, the roads seem almost overbuilt for ordinary traffic, as if their appearance matters as much as their use. This is one of the details that keeps the mystery alive. A road that is only practical usually hides its ambition. These roads, at least in their most impressive stretches, seem to announce it. The expansion is not random. Major routes tend to gather around centers of important settlements with storage capacity, ritual spaces, defensible locations, resource zones, or places where different ecological regions meet. Such meeting points are powerful in ancient economies. A community near the boundary between highland and lowland, desert and river valley, coast and interior, or fertile basin and mineral-rich hills can become a broker between worlds. Roads make that brokerage visible. They allow goods from one zone to pass into another, and they allow ideas to travel with them. Every extension of the road system changes the map of opportunity. A village once near the edge of the known world becomes a stopping point. A spring becomes a strategic station. A shrine becomes more accessible, and therefore more central. A quarry that once served a few nearby communities begins to supply distant builders. A route used by a handful of families becomes part of a larger ceremonial or economic cycle. The network does not simply connect existing importance. It creates new importance along the way. This is how landscapes become political. Not necessarily with flags or borders, but with repeated patterns of movement. Those who maintain the roads gain influence. Those who control key junctions gain leverage. Those who live near water along a dry route may become indispensable. Those who can organize labor across distance may begin to command respect, tribute, or fear. The roads are not just transportation. They are authority stretched across space. Yet the authority they reveal may have been uneven. Some sections might have been built by central direction, others by local communities aligning themselves with a wider tradition. Some roads may have been maintained for generations, others may have been ceremonial experiments, used intensely for a time and then abandoned. The evidence remains incomplete, and roads are especially difficult to date with precision because they are often cleaned, reused, repaired, and exposed. A route may have begun as a trail centuries before it was formalized, and then remained visible long after its original purpose faded. Time accumulates inside a road in layers that are hard to separate. Still, the pattern points to planning. Straightness across long distances usually requires more than casual foot traffic. Builders must choose a destination not merely by immediate visibility, but by inherited knowledge of where the line should go. They may use sighting points, markers, ridges, towers, cairns, or natural landmarks. They may work from both ends toward the middle. They may align sections with a distant mountain or ceremonial center. However they do it, the result is a shared geometry that turns separate places into parts of a single mental world. A lesser-known feature of some ancient road landscapes is the presence of small structures or markers near routes that are not easily classified. They may be shrines, rest points, boundary markers, offering places, watch stations, or something that served several roles at once. Their ambiguity is important. Modern categories often demand that a structure be religious, political, domestic, or economic. Ancient life was rarely so neatly divided. A traveller stopping beside the road might rest, make an offering, exchange news, mark loyalty to a centre, or remember the dead. The road corridor becomes a sequence of actions, not merely a strip of cleared ground. As the network expands, it also changes how people think about belonging. A person born in a small settlement can now imagine themselves connected to places they may visit only once or twice in a lifetime. A young traveller walking a road maintained by many communities may feel the presence of a larger order. The road teaches scale. It tells people that their village is not alone, that there is a system beyond the next ridge, that distant people share enough customs or obligations to keep the same line open. This is one reason roads can be so central to identity. They do not merely move bodies, they move certainty. They make the larger world repeatable. A journey taken by one generation can be taken by the next. A pilgrimage can follow the same approach. A trade delegation can arrive along a recognized corridor. A funeral procession, a seasonal gathering, a marriage exchange, or a diplomatic visit can unfold along a route already heavy with memory. The road allows society to rehearse itself. The labour behind such repetition must have been immense. Clearing a road once is only the beginning. Wind covers it. Plants return. Floods cut channels through it. Stones tumble down slopes. Insects, animals, and roots alter its surface. Human maintenance is a battle against the landscape's slow refusal to remain ordered. The fact that some road systems persisted suggests that maintenance was built into social life. It may have been seasonal. It may have been required before ceremonies. It may have been tied to tribute, communal obligation, or ritual purification. No single explanation fully accounts for the diversity of ancient roadwork. But the larger truth is clear roads survive as roads only when people keep choosing them. The expansion may also have required specialists, not specialists in the modern professional sense, but people recognized for knowledge of terrain, construction, ritual alignment, or negotiation between communities. There may have been route keepers, surveyors, elders who knew old paths, ceremonial leaders who determined correct approaches, and workers skilled at stabilizing surfaces or marking edges. Their expertise would not necessarily leave personal signatures. Ancient infrastructure often hides the people who made it. The more successful the system, the more natural it appears. At its height, the network likely felt permanent. That feeling is one of the most dangerous illusions any civilization can have. When roads are maintained for generations, they begin to seem inevitable. Children born beside them cannot imagine the landscape without them. Traders depend on them. Ritual calendars assume them. Leaders use them to project influence. Settlements grow around them. The road becomes part of how society breathes. But permanence is not the same as invulnerability. A network can expand beyond the capacity to maintain it. A drought can make a key water stop fail. Conflict can turn a safe corridor into a dangerous one. A ritual center can lose authority. A trade good can become less valuable. A flood can cut a section and reveal that no one has the labor or confidence to repair it. The same straight lines that once symbolized mastery can become brittle if too much depends on them. For the moment, though, the roads continue outward. They cross the world the builders know, bringing distant places into relationship. They turn geography into memory and memory into order. The people who walk them do not think of themselves as shadows in a future mystery. They are participants in a living system, one that seems strong because it is visible, because it is used, because every journey confirms it. Their roads point forward with absolute conviction. Only later will that conviction feel almost tragic. At its height, the road system is no longer just a solution to distance. It is the shape of the civilization itself. The lines across the land have become so familiar that people may no longer think of them as achievements. They are simply there, like ridges, wells, stars, and seasonal winds. Children learn them as part of growing up. Travellers measure their lives by them. Elders remember who left along them, who returned, who never did, and which journeys changed the fate of families. The roads bind the world together so completely that the society walking them begins to seem larger, stronger, and more permanent than any single settlement. This is the golden age of movement, though no one living inside it would call it that. Golden ages are usually named after they are gone. While they happen, they feel like normal life, only fuller and more confident. Goods move with greater regularity. Ceremonies draw people from farther away. Distant communities recognize one another through shared objects, shared rituals, or shared obligations. A person standing at a crossroads may see more variety in a single day than their grandparents saw in a seasoned travellers carrying bundles, workers repairing surfaces, families moving between settlements, ritual groups approaching a sacred centre, traders bringing materials whose origins lie beyond the horizon. The roads make abundance visible. Not necessarily abundance in the sense of luxury, but abundance in connection. A piece of shell from a distant coast, a fine blade of volcanic glass, a basket of dried food, a carved ornament, a bundle of dyed fibre, a mineral pigment, a rare stone bead, or a ceremonial object can all become proof that the network works. Each object says that someone moved safely from one zone to another. Someone trusted the road. Someone knew where to stop, whom to ask, what dangers to avoid, and what obligations to honour. For a society without surviving written records, this movement may have been one of the main ways identity spread. A style of pottery travels, but so does the technique for making it. A ritual object travels, but so does the story attached to it. A marriage partner travels, and with them come songs, recipes, warnings, kinship ties, and new claims on distant households. Roads are often described as economic infrastructure, and they are, but they are also channels of memory. They allow culture to move at walking speed. At the centre of this living system may have been one or more places of special gravity, perhaps a settlement with larger buildings, storage rooms, ceremonial architecture, plazas, burial grounds, or unusual concentrations of imported goods. Perhaps a sacred landscape rather than a city in the strict sense. The evidence remains incomplete in many such cases, and scholars still debate whether some road networks radiated from political capitals, ritual centres, trade hubs, or a combination of all three. But the roads themselves imply hierarchy. Some places mattered enough that paths pointed toward them repeatedly. Some destinations pulled the wider world into alignment. Approaching such a centre along a carefully made road would have been an experience, not just a journey. The traveller might see the destination for hours before reaching it, rising and disappearing with the folds of the land. The straightness of the road could create anticipation. Each step confirms direction. Each landmark signals nearness. By the time travellers arrive, they have already been shaped by the route. The road prepares the mind before the ceremony, market, council, or gathering begins. This is one of the quieter powers of ancient infrastructure. It disciplines perception. A road tells the body how to move and the eyes where to look. It controls approach, timing, and expectation. If a route is aligned with a ridge, mountain, shrine, or horizon point, the traveller's attention is guided long before arrival. The landscape becomes part of the message, A society that can organize approach can organize emotion. Daily life at this height would still be hard. Roads do not eliminate hunger, illness, conflict, or grief. They do not soften stone or make rain dependable, but they widen the range of possible responses. A poor harvest in one area can be answered by exchange with another. A ritual crisis can be answered by gathering. A leader can send messengers. A family can relocate along known paths. A craftsperson can find new materials. The road system gives people options. And options are one of the deepest forms of resilience. A lesser-known detail about ancient movement is how much of it may have been intermittent rather than constant. Modern people often imagine roads in terms of continuous traffic, but many ancient routes may have come alive in pulses. A road could be quiet for days, then fill with travellers before a ceremony. It could carry trade after harvest, then fall silent in the harshest season. It could be used intensely by certain groups and rarely by others. This pulsing rhythm matters because a road's importance cannot always be measured by the number of footsteps at any given moment. A ceremonial route used only a few times a year could still be central to the society's identity. The road network also changes political imagination. Authority can now travel. A command, an invitation, a warning, or a ritual obligation can move from center to edge. Influence no longer depends only on proximity. Communities far away may feel tied to a central place because roads make the tie visible and repeatable. If tribute exists, it can move along these lines. If sacred objects circulate, they can follow recognized corridors. If labor is summoned, people know the path. The system turns scattered settlements into a world that can act together, at least when belief and necessity align. But the very success of this order may have made its weaknesses harder to see. When a network functions well, people build their assumptions around it. Settlements grow where roots meet. Social status may depend on controlling movement. Ritual calendars may assume distant participation. Trade partnerships may depend on predictable passage. Leaders may mistake cooperation for obedience, and maintenance for permanence. A system that took generations to build can begin to feel like the natural condition of the world. Under the surface, however, complexity accumulates. More roads mean more maintenance. More distant obligations mean greater strain in bad years. More reliance on imported goods means greater vulnerability if exchange falters. More centralization, if it exists, means greater consequences if the center loses legitimacy. The Golden Age is therefore not simply a peak. It is also a moment of maximum exposure. The civilization has extended itself beautifully across the land. But every extension creates another point that can fail. Still, from within, the system likely feels powerful. On a clear morning astern, a traveller can step onto the road and know that others have done the same for generations. The line ahead is not vague, it is certain. It has been cleared by hands now dead, repaired by families still living, and walked by people whose stories cling to places along the way. The road is proof that the world holds together. That feeling, more than the stonework itself, is what later disappearance will destroy. When the builders vanish from the record, the roads remain as evidence of a confidence so complete that it almost hurts to look at. They show a society that believed in continuity, in repeated journeys, in shared destinations. They show people who invested labor not merely in surviving today, but in making tomorrow navigable. For a time, it worked. The distances were bound. The settlements breathed through one another. The empty land was not empty at all. but threaded with footsteps, obligations, and returning paths. And then, somewhere inside that order, the first distances began to break. The first signs are not dramatic. Civilizations rarely begin their collapse with a single unmistakable omen. More often, the earliest fractures are small enough to explain away. A road is not repaired after a seasonal flood. A storage room is left half empty. A distant settlement sends fewer travellers to a gathering. A shrine receives offerings of poorer quality than before, or offerings stop arriving from one direction while they continue from another. A family leaves a house and no one moves into it. A minor route begins to fade under windblown dust, and because other roads still function, no one treats the loss as a warning. But the landscape is keeping count. Every neglected section changes the system slightly. Every abandoned outpost increases the distance between safe stopping points. Every missed journey weakens a relationship that once seemed permanent. The roads, which had made the civilization feel connected and resilient, begin to reveal their dependence on constant human attention. They do not fail all at once. They loosen. In the archaeological record, this phase can be frustratingly hard to read. Abandonment does not always leave a layer of ash or broken weapons. Sometimes the evidence is simply absence fewer imported goods, fewer repairs, less construction, changing pottery styles, reduced occupation, or a settlement surface slowly sealed by sand. Scholars still debate the timing of decline in many ancient road-building societies, precisely because human withdrawal can look so quiet. A place may be used seasonally after permanent occupation ends. A road may remain active long after the settlement it once served has shrunk. A ceremonial site may continue to draw visitors even as daily life around it changes beyond recognition. This ambiguity matters because it challenges the idea of an overnight vanishing. What later looks sudden from a distance may have been experienced as a long period of adjustment. People may not have thought they were living through collapse. They may have thought they were enduring a bad season, then another, then a change in leadership, then a dangerous route, then a failed harvest, then a decision to send children elsewhere. Collapse, while it is happening, can feel like a series of practical choices. The roads record those choices unevenly. Some remain clean and maintained, suggesting that certain corridors still matter. Others fall out of use. Minor branches disappear first, especially those serving marginal settlements or specialized places whose importance has declined. A route to a distant quarry may become unnecessary if the material is no longer used or no longer worth the journey. A road to a ceremonial site may fade if belief shifts, if leadership weakens, or if the gatherings become too dangerous or too costly. A path to water may survive longer than almost anything, because thirst is less negotiable than politics. Water, again, may have been the deepest pressure. In a dry or unstable environment, even modest climate shifts can transform a road system. A route designed around dependable springs becomes fragile if one spring fails. A chain of water stops can support travel only as long as the links remain intact. If a traveller must cross too far between reliable sources, the road may still exist physically, but its usefulness collapses. What survives in the record suggests that ancient communities often adapted creatively to changing water conditions, but adaptation has limits. A road cannot carry water that is no longer there. Environmental stress may also have struck unevenly. One valley dries while another remains productive. One settlement suffers erosion while another gains from shifted runoff. One community abandons fields while another expands. This unevenness can produce tension. The road network, once a tool of mutual support, now connects places experiencing different levels of hardship. People in a struggling area may move toward more secure zones. Those secure zones may not welcome them. Trade may turn into dependency. Dependency may turn into resentment. The old routes continue to carry movement, but the meaning of that movement changes. A lesser-known sign of stress in ancient landscapes is the reorganization of settlement locations. Communities sometimes move from open, convenient areas to more defensible or water-secure places. They may cluster together after a period of dispersion, or disperse after a central place loses authority. Such changes can look like disappearance if only one site is studied. But across a wider landscape, they may reveal people repositioning themselves. The civilization is not vanishing yet. It is rearranging under pressure. The road system responds to this rearrangement. Junctions that once mattered lose traffic. New informal paths appear. Old ceremonial routes may be bypassed by more practical trails. Travelers may choose safer but longer routes, avoiding exposed corridors or politically unstable regions. A society that once prized straightness may begin to value concealment, flexibility, or local survival. The perfect road remains, but people no longer trust it in the same way. This shift is psychologically important. Roads depend on confidence. A traveller must believe that the route is safe enough, that water exists where expected, that allies or kin remain along the way, that arrival is worth the risk. Once that confidence weakens, use can decline quickly. Even if the physical road is intact, fear can make it functionally broken. A rumour of raiders, disease, hostile strangers, failed wells, or conflict near a crossing may reroute movement faster than erosion. The central places may feel the change first as silence at the edges. Fewer distant visitors arrive. Less tribute, if tribute existed, comes in. Ritual gatherings shrink. Imported objects become rarer. Leaders or ceremonial authorities may respond by demanding more labour, intensifying rituals, repairing roads more visibly, or emphasizing older traditions with greater force. Sometimes societies under stress invest heavily in the very symbols that once defined their strength. A road may be repaired not because traffic justifies it, but because maintaining it asserts that the world is still ordered. Yet symbolic repair cannot solve every problem. If harvests fail, if water shrinks, if conflict spreads, if young families leave, the system loses the human energy required to maintain itself. Roads are durable, but maintenance is demographic. It requires bodies, time, food, and belief. When a society is strong, those costs are absorbed. When it weakens, every repair competes with survival. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the first broken distances. In some places, climate may have led. In others, political fragmentation, trade disruption, disease, conflict, or religious change may have mattered more. The most plausible picture is often not one cause, but a convergence. A drought becomes more dangerous because leadership is already strained. A trade disruption becomes more serious because local resources are depleted. Conflict becomes more likely because water and food are less secure. The road network does not cause the crisis, but it transmits its effects. What makes this stage haunting is that much of the old world is still visible. The roads still lie underfoot. The sacred places still stand. The settlements are not all empty. People still remember better times because those better times are within living memory. An elder may recall when a distant community always came to the seasonal gathering. A trader may remember when a route was safe. A child may hear stories of journeys no longer taken. The civilization has not disappeared, but its map has begun to shrink, and once a map shrinks, imagination shrinks with it. Places that were once familiar become distant, distant kin become strangers, strangers become threats. A road no longer walked becomes a line into uncertainty. Dust gathers not only on the surface, but in memory. The people still live, still adapt, still make choices, but the network that once held them together is losing its rhythm. This is how a vanished world often begins to vanish, not in fire, not in a single night, but in the quiet failure of return. Someone stops coming, someone stops repairing, someone decides the journey is no longer worth the danger. The road remains straight as ever, but its promise is weakening. The distance has not changed. The society's ability to cross it has. When the landscape turns hostile, it rarely announces itself as a catastrophe at first. It begins with ordinary things becoming unreliable. A spring that elders once trusted now weakens before the dry season ends. A stream bed that used to hold pools after rain becomes a ribbon of cracked mud. Winds lift more dust from exposed soil. Plants that fed people, animals, and fires retreat into thinner patches. Fields require more labour for smaller returns. The same road that once carried confidence from one settlement to another now carries news that sounds too similar wherever it arrives. Less water, poorer harvests, longer walks, harder choices. The danger of environmental change is not only that it removes resources, it also damages memory. A society can endure a harsh year if it knows that harsh years pass. It can adapt to a dry season if the old pattern returns. But when the old pattern stops returning, inherited knowledge begins to lose some of its power. The elders may still know where water was found, where grasses grew, where animals gathered, and where travellers could rest. Yet the land no longer behaves as expected. This is one of the deepest kinds of instability, because it makes wisdom uncertain. Roads built around predictable landscapes become vulnerable in unpredictable ones. A route may still be straight, visible, and well made. But if the water stop at its midpoint fails, the geometry becomes dangerous. A road through open country may once have been a triumph of planning. Under harsher conditions, it becomes an exposure. Travellers must carry more water, move at different hours, send scouts, avoid seasons once considered safe, or abandon the route altogether. The road has not moved, but the world around it has changed enough to make the old design less forgiving. Drought is often the first suspect in stories of ancient disappearance, and for good reason. Many societies that depended on marginal rainfall, seasonal rivers, or carefully managed water sources suffered when climate shifted. Tree rings, lake sediments, pollen records, cave deposits, and other environmental evidence sometimes reveal periods of prolonged dryness that overlap with social stress. But drought alone is rarely the whole story. Scholars still debate how directly climate pressure caused specific collapses, because people are not simple instruments of weather. They adapt, migrate, trade, store, prey, reorganize, and sometimes endure conditions that look impossible from the outside. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the fall of complex societies in difficult landscapes. Still, drought can push every weakness harder. It can reduce food, increase travel distance, intensify competition, weaken political authority, and strain ritual systems built around renewal and abundance. If leaders, priests, or elders are believed to maintain harmony with land and sky, repeated environmental failure can become a crisis of legitimacy. A dry field is not only an economic problem, It may be interpreted as a broken relationship between people, ancestors, gods, or the landscape itself. The roads then carry not only hungry travellers, but also anxiety. Erosion may have added another wound. When vegetation thins, soil loosens. Heavy rain, when it does come, can cut deeply into exposed ground. Flash floods are especially destructive in dry regions because the land, hardened and stripped, cannot absorb sudden water. A road crossing a wash may be severed in an afternoon. A carefully cleared surface may become a channel for runoff. Edges collapse, stones shift. A route that took generations to refine can be scarred by one violent storm. The cruelty as almost elegant drought weakens the land, then flood tears it open. Earthquakes, too, may play a role in some ancient landscapes. A tremor can change water flow, damage buildings, trigger landslides, block passes, or rupture carefully maintained routes. In regions shaped by seismic activity, ancient roads sometimes cross faulted terrain where the ground itself refuses permanence. It is difficult to tie a specific quake to a specific abandonment unless the evidence is unusually clear, and scholars remain cautious. But for the people living through it, even a localized disaster could reshape movement. A collapsed pass or buried spring might isolate a community already under stress. Resource pressure can be slower, but just as dangerous. Timber, fuel, building materials, fertile soils, grazing land, and wild foods can all decline under a growing population or changing climate. Roads may initially help by expanding access to distant resources. Then, over time, that expansion can become dependency. If nearby wood is exhausted, people must travel farther. If fields decline, grain must come from elsewhere. If key materials are available only through exchange, the road network becomes essential to ordinary survival. What began as opportunity becomes necessity. A lesser-known detail in ancient environmental crises is that resilience often creates delay. A well-connected society can mask local failure for a long time. Food can be moved. People can relocate temporarily. Ritual centers can redistribute goods. Kin networks can absorb hardship. Roads make all of this possible. But because the network softens early shocks, it may also allow deeper dependence to build. By the time the system visibly fails, the underlying stress may have been accumulating for generations. The people on the ground would not experience these forces as abstract climate change or resource depletion. They would experience them through bodies and routines, longer walks to gather fuel, smaller meals, animals dying earlier in the season, children sent to relatives, elders debating whether old wells should be deepened, whether fields should be abandoned, whether a dangerous journey must still be attempted. A traveller arriving from the road with news of another failed water source could change the mood of an entire settlement. Silence at a distant junction might mean that people there had moved, or died, or chosen not to risk the route. Environmental hardship can also transform social trust. In good years, obligations are easier to honour. In bad years, every exchange becomes sharper. A community asked to contribute labour to a road may refuse because it needs all hands for fields. A settlement expected to host travellers may have no surplus to share. Ritual gatherings may shrink because the journey costs too much food and water. Leaders may demand more precisely when people have less to give. The roads still connect communities, but connection under scarcity can feel like pressure rather than belonging. There may have been attempts to restore the old balance. People could repair damaged routes, build new water catchments, move settlements closer to reliable sources, shift crops, intensify storage, or change ceremonial calendars. They may have widened some roads, abandoned others, or created alternate paths around failed zones. What survives in the record suggests that ancient communities were often remarkably flexible. The tragedy is not that they lacked intelligence. It is that intelligence does not guarantee enough rain, enough soil, enough peace, or enough time. In some places, the road system may have become a record of environmental triage. Main routes remained open while peripheral ones faded. Roads to essential water or central ritual places were maintained longer than roads to declining settlements. Corridors through the most damaged landscapes became risky, then rare, then symbolic. A road might still exist as an ancestral line, remembered in story, but no longer walked except by the desperate or the devout. This is when the landscape begins to feel changed beyond recognition, not all at once, and not everywhere equally, but enough that the older map no longer matches lived reality. The people who built the roads inherited a world of routes that made sense. Their descendants may have inherited the same roads under a different sky, with fewer certainties and more warnings. A line that once meant connection now might mean thirst. A junction that once meant gathering now might mean abandonment. A ceremonial approach that once filled with footsteps may now lie open under wind. And still, the roads endure. That endurance is part of their haunting power. Human systems can fail while their physical traces remain almost indifferent. The stones do not explain that the spring dried, that the harvest failed, that the children were sent away, that the old ceremonies no longer brought reassurance. The road simply lies there, straight and silent, holding the shape of a promise made in a more generous time. When later people look at it and imagine a sudden vanishing, they are seeing the final stillness, not the long negotiation that came before it. The landscape did not need to kill everyone to end the world they had built. It only needed to make the old pattern impossible. Once enough water points failed, once enough repairs were neglected, once enough journeys became too costly, the network that had turned distance into order began to lose its meaning. The civilization's greatest strength had been movement. Its crisis came when movement itself became dangerous. Hardship does not remain environmental for long. Once water becomes uncertain, once food becomes uneven, once roads become harder to trust, the pressure moves inward, into relationships between people. A dry spring is a physical fact, but the argument over who may use the next spring is social. A poor harvest is an ecological problem, but the decision to share, refuse, raid, migrate, or submit is political. The landscape may begin the crisis, but human choices give it its shape. The roads now carry a different kind of movement. In the age of confidence, they carried traders, pilgrims, families, workers, and messengers through a world that recognized itself. Under strain, they may carry strangers who arrive hungry, armed, desperate, or unwelcome. A route that once tied communities together can become the easiest path for conflict. This is one of the bitter reversals of infrastructure. The better a society becomes at connection, the more efficiently danger can travel when trust breaks. Not every newcomer would have been an enemy. Many were probably relatives, allies, former trading partners, or displaced people seeking help through older obligations. Migration in ancient worlds was often layered and gradual, not a single invading wave. Families might move first, then larger groups. Young people might marry into safer regions. Craft specialists might relocate where patrons remained. Herders might shift seasonal routes. What later legends compress into strangers came may have been years of movement by people who were themselves under pressure. Scholars still debate how much migration contributed to the decline of many ancient societies, because material evidence can show new styles and settlement changes without clearly revealing whether they came through peaceful exchange, population movement, conquest, or imitation. Yet even peaceful migration can strain a fragile system. A settlement with barely enough stored food cannot easily absorb many arrivals. A spring can support only so many people and animals. Fields abandoned in one region may increase pressure on fields elsewhere. Old kinship rules may be tested by numbers they were never designed to handle. Hospitality, one of the great stabilizers of road systems, becomes harder when every visitor represents another mouth, another claim, another uncertainty. Conflict may have followed. Archaeologists look for signs: carefully burned buildings, defensive walls, trauma on bones, weapons in unusual contexts, settlements moved to more protected locations, valuables hidden and never recovered. But the evidence is often uneven. Violence does not always leave dramatic traces, and not every burned layer means war. Houses burn by accident. Fortified sites may guard against raiders, or symbolize status, or serve as refuges during periods of tension. The responsible picture is cautious. There may have been conflict, perhaps serious conflict in some corridors, but the record rarely supports a simple story of one people destroying another everywhere at once. Internal fracture may have been even more important. A road network depends on cooperation across distance, and cooperation depends on belief that the system is fair enough, useful enough, or sacred enough to maintain. Under stress, communities may begin to question old obligations. Why repair a road to a center that no longer protects them? Why send goods to a ritual place if the ceremonies no longer seem to bring rain? Why host travelers from a distant settlement that has nothing to give in return? Why follow leaders whose authority was built in better times? The center, if there was one, faces a dilemma. It can loosen control and allow local survival strategies, but that risks losing authority, or it can demand more labor, more offerings, more loyalty, and more movement along roads that are becoming harder to use. Many societies in crisis respond by intensifying the symbols of order, larger ceremonies, stricter rituals, more visible construction, stronger claims to tradition. Sometimes this works. Shared belief can hold people together through extraordinary hardship, but sometimes intensification makes the strain worse. When the world is failing, demanding more from exhausted people can turn reverence into resentment. Trade disruption adds another fracture. Goods that once moved freely may become rare. Materials from distant sources disappear from settlements that once used them regularly. Craft traditions change because old supplies are unavailable. Local substitutes appear. Status objects become fewer or more tightly controlled. A person who once gained prestige through long-distance exchange may lose influence. A community that controlled a junction may decline if traffic shifts away. The road system is still physically present, but its economic bloodstream thins. A lesser-known detail in collapses is that simplification can be a survival strategy. Later observers may see fewer luxury goods, smaller settlements, less monumental construction, and assume decline in every sense. But for people under pressure, reducing complexity can be practical. They may abandon large centers because smaller groups are easier to feed. They may stop maintaining distant roads because local routes matter more. They may give up elaborate rituals because survival demands flexibility. What looks like cultural failure from one angle may be adaptation from another. The tragedy is that adaptation can save people while dissolving the civilization that once connected them. This distinction matters for the vanished builders. They may not have all died. Many may have survived by becoming less visible archaeologically. They may have moved into other communities, adopted new pottery styles, shifted languages, married into neighbouring groups, or abandoned the old road-centred identity. A civilization can vanish as a system while its people continue breathing under different names. The evidence remains incomplete. But this is often more plausible than sudden extermination. Still, there may have been moments of real fear. Imagine a settlement near a road that once brought seasonal visitors. For generations, arrival meant exchange and ceremony. Now each dust cloud on the horizon is uncertain. Are they kin traders, refugees, raiders, messengers with bad news? The same open approach that once made the settlement connected now makes it exposed. People watch the road differently. They store food differently. They sleep differently. They may move houses closer together, build walls, hide goods, or avoid travel except in groups. Roads can become psychologically haunted before they become physically abandoned. A traveller remembers where someone was attacked. A family avoids a junction associated with disease or hunger. A community stops sending children along a once familiar route. Stories gather around dangerous stretches, not as entertainment, but as warnings. The road's meaning changes one memory at a time. No single explanation fully accounts for the social unravelling, environmental stress, migration, conflict, trade disruption, religious doubt, leadership failure, and local adaptation can all interact. The important point is that collapse is not only something that happens to a society, it is something a society does, through thousands of decisions made under narrowing possibilities. People choose where to go, whom to trust, what to repair, what to abandon, which obligations to honour, and which memories to leave behind. By this stage, the old network has become uneven. Some roads still pulse with life, others as dangerous, others are forgotten except by elders. Some central places still call people in, but from fewer directions. The civilization is not gone, but it no longer moves as one body. It has become a set of fragments, each responding to pressure in its own way. And this is where the idea of vanishing overnight begins to take root. When a system is already hollowed by years of stress, the final break can look sudden. One last drought, one violent season, one failed ceremony, one attack, one leadership crisis, one decision by a large group to leave, and the visible world changes almost at once. Houses empty, roads fall silent. The centre stops receiving visitors. Later observers see the silence and imagine a single night. They are not entirely wrong to sense suddenness. They are only missing the long fracture that made suddenness possible. The roads, once instruments of unity, have become witnesses to separation. They still point toward old destinations, but the society that gave those destinations meaning is pulling apart. The builders are becoming harder to recognize, not because they have vanished yet, but because they are changing shape under pressure. The final mystery is approaching, not as a thunderclap from nowhere, but as the last visible moment of a world that has already been losing itself for a long time. The phrase vanished overnight belongs more to memory than to archaeology, but memory has its own kind of truth. It does not always preserve duration, it preserves shock. A society may weaken over generations, its roads thinning, its settlements shrinking, its rituals losing force, and yet the final moment can still arrive with the terrible speed of a door closing. For those who remain to witness it, or for those who arrive afterward, the difference between a living place and an abandoned one can feel like a single night. Imagine the centre at the end of its confidence. The roads still approach it with their old precision, but fewer people come. The cleared surfaces are no longer repaired everywhere. Dust gathers at the edges. Shrubs return in places once kept open. The outer settlements have changed first, then the corridors between them, and finally the places that once seemed too important to fail. A plaza that once filled during seasonal gatherings now echoes under wind. Storage rooms hold less. Houses are patched rather than rebuilt. The old system has not disappeared, but it has become thin enough that one more shock can pass through it and leave almost nothing standing in its former shape. That shock may not have been one event. It may have been several, close enough together that memory fused them. A severe drought after years of poor rainfall, a key spring failing along a major route, a conflict at a junction that makes travel dangerous, a ritual gathering that no longer draws the distant communities, a leadership crisis at the centre, disease moving along the same corridors that once carried trade, a flood cutting a road and destroying fields already weakened by erosion. Any one of these might be survivable. Together, they could make the old world impossible. Archaeology rarely gives the drama that legend wants. It may show no massacre, no single burn layer, no neatly dated catastrophe. It may show abandonment surfaces, rooms left with ordinary objects, unfinished repairs, storage areas cleaned out or partly emptied, pottery styles changing, imported goods declining, burials shifting and construction stopping. These are quieter clues, but they can be just as devastating. They suggest not a city frozen by magic, but people making decisions under pressure. They took what they could carry. They left what was too heavy, too broken, too sacred, or no longer useful. They did not know they were creating a mystery. They were trying to survive. The night of vanishing, then, may be a way of describing the final withdrawal from a place already wounded. A settlement can be occupied on one side of a season and empty on the other. A road can be used during one ceremonial cycle and neglected during the next. A centre can remain meaningful in memory long after people stop living there permanently. From a human perspective, the final departure may have been painfully specific. A last group leaves before dawn to avoid heat. A family closes a storage pit. Someone looks back at the road and knows they may not return. No inscription records the thought. The earth receives only footprints. It is important not to turn that silence into fantasy. Popular theories often rush into gaps, imagining mysterious disappearances, hidden technologies, curses, celestial punishments, or visitors from beyond the world. Such stories can be entertaining, but they usually explain less than the ordinary evidence already does. The roads do not require impossible knowledge. The abandonment does not require supernatural removal. What is remarkable is more human. A society can build with discipline, intelligence, and beauty, and still be defeated by converging pressures too large or too persistent to absorb. Yet ordinary does not mean simple. The final abandonment may have varied from place to place. Some communities may have left early, some late. Some may have returned seasonally for generations. Some roads may have remained sacred even after settlement declined. Some groups may have moved only a short distance, staying within the same broad landscape but abandoning the old centres. Others may have joined neighbouring peoples, carrying memories of the roads into new identities. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate where continuity ends and disappearance begins. The most haunting possibility is that the builders did not vanish in their own minds. They may have believed they were relocating temporarily, waiting for water, safety, or order to return. Many abandonments in history begin as pauses. People leave a difficult place intending to come back after the crisis passes. They store objects, close rooms, mark boundaries, or maintain ritual ties. But if the drought continues, if children grow up elsewhere, if old leaders die, if roads become unsafe, if new alliances form, the temporary absence hardens into permanence. A return delayed long enough becomes a disappearance. From the road, the change would be gradual and then sudden. For years, fewer travellers, then almost none. A surface once kept clean begins to blur. Tracks from animals cross it without being cleared. A cairn collapses and is not rebuilt. Sand collects where feet once scattered it. Rain cuts a shallow channel, then a deeper one. Seeds take root in cracks. The road still points, but the pointing has lost its audience. At the abandoned centre, time begins its slow work of undoing intention. Roofs fail first, walls slump, wind enters rooms that once held voices, rodents nest where grain was stored, pots break under fallen beams, plaster flakes, doorways fill with dust. If there are monuments, they become landmarks without context. If there are shrines, offerings stop. The sacred does not disappear from the stone immediately, but without ritual renewal, meaning begins to detach. Later travellers may avoid the place, reuse it, fear it, loot it, or misunderstand it. The builders become ancestors, strangers, or no one at all. A lesser-known truth about abandonment is that empty places are rarely empty for long. Other people notice them. Later groups may camp in abandoned rooms, reuse roads, take stones for new buildings, bury their dead near old sacred places, or invent stories about who came before. This reuse complicates the record. It can make a vanished culture seem more continuous than it was, or more abruptly replaced than it was. Archaeologists must untangle layers of occupation, repair, scavenging, memory, and forgetting. The final night is never archaeologically clean. Still, one can imagine a moment when the old system no longer functions. A messenger sets out and finds no one at the next station. A ceremony is prepared, and the distant groups do not arrive. A road crew is expected, but there are not enough workers. A leader calls for repair, and the call carries no authority beyond the nearest settlement. At that point, the civilization has crossed an invisible threshold. The roads still exist, but the network is dead. That distinction is central. A road is a physical thing, a network is a relationship. The physical thing can survive for centuries. The relationship can die in a season. The vanished people built roads, but what disappeared was the agreement that made those roads meaningful. Once the agreement failed, every settlement had to make its own choices. Some choices saved lives, some erased the old world. So the night of vanishing should not be imagined as every hearth going cold at the same instant across the entire landscape. It is better understood as the moment when later memory can no longer follow the people clearly. The road continues, but the identity thins, disperses, and changes names. The civilization falls out of the historical frame. To those who come centuries later, the result appears impossible: perfect roads, silent settlements, no builders in sight. And perhaps that is why the story endures. It compresses generations of stress into a single image: a road at dawn, empty where travellers should be. The land is still, the line remains. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the descendants of the builders may still be alive, speaking new languages, walking different paths, remembering fragments or nothing at all. But here, on the old road, The world they made has ended, not with a shout, not with a final inscription, not with a clear explanation carved for strangers, but with absence settling into the dust. The most honest witnesses are often the smallest things, not the dramatic walls, not the long roads visible across the open land, not the distant centres that first catch the eye, but the fragments left beside them: a broken vessel, a worn stone, a scatter of charcoal, a bead dropped near a threshold, a tool abandoned where work stopped. These are not grand announcements. They are accidents of survival, yet they are where the vanished people become closest, because they show not only what the society built, but where ordinary lives were interrupted, redirected, or quietly carried away. Along the roads, clues gather in uneven patterns. Near some stretches, archaeologists find small structures whose purpose remains debated. They may have been shrines, rest points, markers, shelters, lookouts, or places where travellers pause to make offerings before continuing. In other places, there are concentrations of pottery fragments, food remains, or stone tools, suggesting repeated stopping. A road is never just the surface people walk on. It includes the spaces beside it, the pauses, the waiting places, the points where travellers look back, gather strength, or mark their passage. What survives in the record suggests that movement was surrounded by ritual and routine. An abandoned tool can be especially revealing. If it is worn out, it may simply have been discarded. If it is still usable, its presence becomes more intriguing. Why leave behind something valuable? Perhaps the owner died, fled, or carried only what mattered most. Perhaps the tool belonged to a work crew and was lost in the dust. Perhaps the object had a ritual role and was never meant to be recovered. Archaeology cannot always decide. The evidence remains incomplete, and the same object can support several careful interpretations. But abandoned tools remind us that collapse happens through material choices. People decide what can be carried and what must be left to time. Burials near roads or settlements add another layer. The treatment of the dead can reveal continuity, stress, migration, changing belief, or social difference, though it must be interpreted with caution. A change in burial custom may suggest new influences or internal transformation. A cemetery that continues after nearby settlement declines may mean the place retained ancestral importance. Isolated remains may indicate violence, hardship, or ordinary death far from home. Scholars still debate many such findings because bones can speak powerfully, but never completely. They show age, injury, diet, disease, ancestry, and sometimes trauma, but not the full story of grief, fear, or meaning. Offerings, when they appear, are among the most haunting clues. Small objects placed near a root, in a shrine, beside a stone marker, or at a threshold may suggest that travellers were asking for protection, giving thanks, honouring ancestors, or maintaining a relationship with the landscape. The offerings may become poorer over time, or less frequent, or change in style. Such shifts can be subtle signs of social stress. A community under pressure may still perform rituals, but with fewer resources, or it may intensify offerings in desperation. No single explanation fully accounts for these patterns, yet they show that the road was not just crossed, it was addressed. Unfinished construction is another kind of silence. A road edge begun but not completed, stones gathered but never set, a building foundation prepared and abandoned, a repair started after flood damage and left incomplete. Such traces are powerful because they interrupt the illusion that ancient remains are simply old. They reveal plans that stopped, Someone expected work to continue. Someone organized labor, marked a line, collected material, and then the future changed. Unfinished work is one of the clearest archaeological forms of broken expectation. At abandoned settlements, the clues become more intimate. In some rooms, people may have removed most useful objects before leaving, suggesting planned departure. In others, heavier items remain grinding stones, large storage vessels, broken tools, architectural beams too difficult to move. A cleaned-out house tells one story, a room left cluttered tells another, but even here, caution is necessary. Later visitors may disturb the record, looters may remove valuables, animals may scatter remains, roof collapse may break objects long after abandonment. The past is not sealed like a museum display, it is rearranged by centuries. One surprising detail in many abandoned places is how often life appears to have continued in fragments after the supposed collapse. A hearth used briefly inside an older ruin, a repaired wall in an otherwise declining settlement, a small burial placed near a former ceremonial centre, a later traveller leaving pottery along an old road. These details resist simple endings. They suggest that places can die as capitals but survive as camps, shrines, landmarks, memories, or warnings. The builders may have vanished as a recognized civilization, but the landscape they shaped continued to attract human attention. The roads themselves can preserve clues through wear. Deep use may compact surfaces, polish stones, or create shallow corridors. A route that was maintained for ceremonial processions may look different from a rough track used mainly by animals or traders. Branching paths may show later adaptations, detours, or attempts to avoid damaged sections. In some places, the original line remains visible while newer, less formal tracks curve around it, as if later people respected the old route but no longer maintained its strict geometry. The road becomes a palimpsest, a surface written and rewritten by changing needs. Dating these clues is difficult. Roads are notoriously hard to place in time because they may lack organic material suitable for direct dating. Archaeologists must often rely on associated artifacts, nearby settlements, construction relationships, soil development, erosion patterns, or rare datable remains found in road features. This uncertainty leaves room for debate. A road may be older than the objects beside it, or younger than the settlement it approaches. A later culture may reuse an older road and leave misleading evidence. The chronological puzzle is part of why the mystery persists. Still, patterns emerge when enough evidence is gathered. Declining maintenance, shifting settlement, reduced long-distance goods, changing ritual deposits, and unfinished repairs together suggest a system losing coherence. None of these clues alone prove sudden disappearance. Together, they describe a world in which connection is becoming harder to sustain. The roads remain legible, but the society around them is changing too quickly or too painfully to keep them alive as before. There is also the silence of what is missing. Few clear records of conquest. No universal destruction layer, no single cemetery of catastrophe, no final inscription explaining why everyone left. For dramatic storytelling, this absence can feel disappointing. For history, it is meaningful. It suggests that the end may not have been one spectacular event, but a dispersal. The people did not leave a final message because they may not have understood themselves to be final. They were moving, adapting, escaping, joining others, surviving. They had no reason to write a farewell to future archaeologists they could not imagine. And yet, beside the roads, one can feel the weight of interruption. The old network had required repeated acts of care. Every cleared surface, every repaired edge, every marked crossing was a small renewal of the world. When those acts stopped, the road began its second life as a ruin. Not a ruin with walls rising against the sky, but a ruin of intention. A line that once organized movement now organizes questions. The clues do not solve the mystery in a single stroke. They deepen it. They show a people practical enough to plan, spiritual enough to mark movement with meaning, connected enough to maintain distant roots, and vulnerable enough that the whole system could unravel. They show that disappearance is not always a void. Sometimes it is a landscape full of evidence, none of it complete, all of it pointing toward lives that were real, decisions that were urgent, and endings that were messier than legend allows. So the road's silence is not empty. It is crowded with traces. A worn stone where grain was ground before a journey, a shrine where offerings thinned, a marker that fell and was never raised, a half-repaired wash crossing, a house cleared carefully before departure, a tool left behind because the hands that used it had more pressing burdens to carry. These are the things that remain when names do not. They do not tell us everything. But they tell us enough to know that the vanished people did not disappear like smoke. They passed through crisis as human beings do, step by step, carrying what they could, leaving the rest beside the road. Once the clues are gathered, the temptation is to make them obey a single explanation: a vanished people, perfect roads, empty settlements, silence in the record. The mind wants one key that turns every lock. Drought did it, war did it, trade failed, the leaders lost control, the gods were abandoned, strangers arrived, the roads became useless. Each theory has a certain force because each captures part of the truth. But ancient collapse is rarely kind enough to be simple. The dust holds more than one answer. The environmental explanation is often the strongest place to begin, because landscapes can change the rules for everyone at once. If water sources weaken, harvests decline, soils erode, and storms become more destructive, even a well-organized society begins to strain. Roads that once connected reliable places become dangerous when those places fail. Communities that once shared surplus have less to give. Ritual centers that once promised renewal face a sky that does not answer. What survives in the record often fits this pattern: shrinking occupation, altered settlement, less movement, and a growing dependence on fewer secure resources. But climate alone can become too convenient. People do not vanish simply because conditions become difficult. They respond, they innovate, migrate, reorganize, and endure. Some communities survive droughts that destroy others. Some abandon large centers while smaller settlements continue. Some change their crops, move closer to water, or shift from long-distance exchange to local resilience. Scholars still debate how much environmental pressure explains any specific disappearance, because the evidence rarely supports a clean line from dry weather to empty roads. Drought may be the pressure, but society decides how that pressure becomes collapse. Conflict offers another explanation, and it has a dark appeal. Roads can carry enemies as easily as allies. If the network connected scattered communities, it also exposed them. A raid along a major route could terrorize many settlements. A struggle over water or trade junctions could make once safe corridors unusable. Defensive relocation, trauma on remains, burned structures, or hidden valuables may suggest violence in some landscapes. Yet war, too, can be overused as an answer. Not every abandoned site was conquered, not every fire was an attack, not every fortified place proves invasion. the evidence remains incomplete, and the most careful reading often points not to one devastating conquest, but to periods of insecurity that made travel and cooperation harder. Internal breakdown may be less dramatic, but more persuasive. The road system required shared belief in its value. People had to maintain it, trust it, and accept the obligations it carried. If distant communities stopped believing that the centre served them, if leaders demanded too much, if ceremonies lost authority, or if local survival became more urgent than collective identity, then the network could fail from within. No army would need to destroy it. People could simply stop showing up. A civilization built on movement can be undone by refusal, exhaustion, and doubt. Trade disruption adds its own evidence. When distant goods disappear from settlements, something has changed. The routes may be unsafe, the suppliers gone, the demand reduced, or the social meaning of those goods transformed. A road network that once brought rare materials and prestige objects may become less important if communities turn inward. But this explanation also has limits. Trade can decline because society is collapsing, or society can weaken because trade declines. Cause and effect blur. The same broken object can be read as evidence of poverty, adaptation, isolation, or changing taste. Then there is migration, perhaps the most human explanation of all. People under pressure move. They follow water, kin, opportunity, safety, rumour, and memory. They do not always move as a single people with one destination. They scatter. Some go north, some south, some into neighbouring settlements, some into smaller groups that leave fewer traces. Over generations, descendants may lose the old identity while keeping fragments of language, craft, ritual, or story. This may be the most important correction to the legend of disappearance. The road builders may have vanished as a recognizable archaeological culture without vanishing as human beings. Popular theories prefer sharper edges. They imagine a sudden curse, a secret knowledge too dangerous to survive, an unknown invader erased from history, or some impossible force that removed a people without leaving evidence. These ideas persist because mystery dislikes patience. But they are unsupported where they leap beyond the record. Ancient engineering does not require supernatural instruction. Abandonment does not require a vanishing spell. The real story is not smaller for being grounded, it is larger, because it belongs to actual people caught inside actual limits. No single explanation fully accounts for the silence. The most plausible answer is convergence. A changing climate weakens food and water. Weakened resources intensify competition. Competition makes roads dangerous. Dangerous roads reduce trade and ritual gathering. Reduced gathering weakens authority. Weakened authority reduces maintenance. Poor maintenance makes movement harder. Harder movement isolates communities. Isolation encourages migration. Migration dissolves the old identity. By the time later observers arrive, the roads remain, but the society that made them has been pulled apart by many hands at once. This is why the mystery endures, not because there are no answers, but because the answers overlap. The vanished people stand at the intersection of environment, belief, politics, economy, and memory. Their roads were strong enough to survive the collapse, but not strong enough to prevent it. That is the hard lesson in the dust. Infrastructure can bind a world together, but it cannot guarantee that the conditions of trust, water, labour, and meaning will last. The competing explanations do not cancel one another. They form a map of fragility. Each one marks a pressure point in the civilization's design. The roads show ambition and coordination, but also dependence. They reveal a people who solved the problem of distance brilliantly. until distance was no longer the only problem. When water failed, when trust weakened, when movement became dangerous, when old centres lost their pull, the perfect line across the land could not make people walk it. And so the answer remains layered, incomplete, and deeply human. They did not vanish because of one curse of history. They vanished from the record because their world became harder to maintain than to leave. The road stayed behind, straight and patient, while the people changed direction. If the old road builder survived under another name, their disappearance becomes less like death and more like a transformation so complete that later history cannot easily follow it. This is one of the most important possibilities, and also one of the hardest to prove. Archaeology can trace pottery, tools, settlement patterns, food remains, house forms, burial customs, and sometimes genetic continuities, but identity is more elusive. A people can keep living while changing the language they speak, the gods they honour, the places they occupy, and the name by which neighbours recognise them. To future observers, that can look like vanishing. To the people themselves, it may have felt like adaptation. The old question, then, begins to shift. Not simply where did they go, but what counted as them. Was the civilization defined by its roads, its settlements, its rituals, its ancestry, its political system, its language, or the memory of belonging to a particular landscape? If the roads fell silent but families moved into nearby valleys, did the people vanish? If their descendants married into neighbouring groups and adopted new customs, did they disappear or endure? If their sacred places were abandoned but their stories survived in altered form, how much continuity is enough to call survival? The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate these boundaries in many ancient cases. Material culture can change quickly when people move or when new influences arrive. A family that once made one kind of pottery may adopt another style because it is useful, prestigious, or expected in a new community. A burial custom may shift under religious pressure. A language can disappear while biological descendants remain. The archaeological record often captures the container of life, not the inner experience of identity. Migration does not always look like a dramatic exodus. It may unfold as a thinning. Young adults leave first, seeking marriage, work, safety, or food. Households split. Seasonal movement becomes permanent. A settlement that once held many families becomes a place visited only for ceremonies or ancestor rites. Then the ceremonies fade. Children born elsewhere know the old road as a story rather than a route. Their grandparents remember the centre. Their parents remember leaving. They remember only that there was once a place in the dry land where their people walked straight roads across the earth. In some cases, descendants may have carried practical knowledge with them. They knew how to find water, how to read distant ridges, how to organize travel, how to build or maintain paths, how to store food for journeys, how to negotiate passage between communities. Such knowledge does not vanish easily. It can be absorbed into neighbouring societies without leaving a label that says where it came from. Later road systems, trade routes, or ritual pathways may preserve older habits beneath newer names. What looks like replacement may include inheritance. There is a lesser-known kind of survival that happens through landscape memory. Later peoples often reuse the roots of earlier ones, not because they know the original builders, but because good roots remain good roots. A pass through mountains, a chain of springs, a ridge that avoids flooding, a line between resource zones, all continue to matter. The old roads may guide feet long after their first meanings are forgotten. in this way. The vanished people shape the behavior of those who come after them without being remembered directly. Their choices become geography. Local traditions may also preserve shadows. A ruined place may become associated with ancestors, giants, spirits, strangers, a cursed settlement, or a people who left before the present world began. Such stories cannot be treated as straightforward records, but neither should they be dismissed carelessly. Oral memory can compress, transform, and mythologize real events over long periods. A drought becomes divine anger, migration becomes banishment, abandonment becomes disappearance overnight. A road built by human labor becomes the work of beings larger than life. The task is not to read legend as fact, but to listen for the historical anxieties it may preserve. The idea of being absorbed is especially important. When a society collapses, its people may enter stronger or more stable neighboring groups. They may become clients, allies, spouses, captives, ritual specialists, laborers, traders, or marginal communities. Their old identity may be useful for a time, then fade. Names given by outsiders may replace self-names. Over generations, the descendants may no longer distinguish themselves from the societies that absorbed them. The road builders vanish from the map, but their bloodlines, memories, and skills continue in the living. This kind of ending is harder to dramatize than destruction, but it is probably more common. Ancient history is full of cultures that seem to appear and disappear because the labels change. Archaeological phases end, pottery styles shift, settlement patterns transform. But human lives continue across those boundaries. A mother does not tell her child that their culture phase has ended. She tells them where to find water, whom to trust, which stories matter, and which places to avoid. Still, survival under another name does not erase loss. A people can endure biologically while losing the world that made them recognizable to themselves. If the roads are no longer maintained, if ceremonies cease, if central places empty, if old obligations dissolve, something real has ended. The descendants may live, but the civilization has changed beyond recovery. This is why the vanished road mystery remains poignant even when disappearance is not literal. What is lost is not only population, it is a pattern of meaning. There may have been grief in that transformation. People leaving an ancestral settlement do not become someone else instantly. They carry memory like a burden. They may speak of the old roads with pride, fear, or bitterness. They may return to bury the dead, make offerings, or salvage stones. They may teach children old place names that later generations forget. They may insist, for a while, that they will go back when conditions improve. Then time does what drought and conflict began. It makes absence normal. No single explanation fully accounts for how identities dissolve, because identity is not a wall that falls in one direction. It is a fabric. It frays, knots, is patched, is woven into other cloth. Some threads remain visible. Others vanish inside the pattern. The road builders may have survived in exactly this way, not as a hidden tribe waiting to be rediscovered, but as ancestors folded into later peoples whose own histories are just as real. The roads, meanwhile, remain in the old land, increasingly detached from those who might explain them. Later travellers see the straight lines and wonder who had the power to make them. They may not know that the answer is partly walking beside them in altered form, in customs, roots, genes, stories, and habits inherited without a name. The builders are absent from the place, but not necessarily from the human future. This is a quieter ending than the legend promises. No single night swallowing a civilization whole. No perfect road leading to a vanished city where everyone disappeared without trace. Instead, there is dispersal, absorption, forgetting, and continuity so transformed that it becomes nearly invisible. The road builders vanish because history is often poor at following ordinary survivors. It remembers walls better than families, ruins better than adaptation, names better than bloodlines, and endings better than slow changes. Yet this possibility makes the roads more powerful, not less. They are not monuments to a dead people alone. They may also be monuments to people who kept living after their world failed, who carried what they could into other landscapes, who gave up old centres but not necessarily life itself. The road remains behind like a shed skin, the visible form of a society that had to become something else. To stand beside it is to face a truth both harsh and strangely hopeful civilizations can vanish. While people endure, long after memory fails, the roads remain available to anyone with feet, animals, curiosity, or need. Later travellers may not know who made them, but they can still recognize usefulness when the land offers it. A straight corridor across difficult ground, a cleared passage between ridges, a route that seems to know where water once lay, these things invite reuse. People may follow the old lines without honouring the old builders, just as modern roads sometimes follow ancient paths without anyone noticing. The dead civilization becomes practical again, not as a culture, but as a convenience. This afterlife changes the roads. New travellers leave new traces. Stones are moved. Markers are rebuilt for different reasons. Shrines are reinterpreted, and sections are altered to fit new destinations. A road that once led to a ceremonial centre may become a trade path, a herding route, a military corridor, or a local shortcut. Later empires or communities may absorb parts of the network into their own systems, claiming authority over lines they did not first create. The original meaning becomes buried beneath continued use. What survives in the record suggests that ancient infrastructure often has many lives, and each life complicates the one before it. Eventually, outsiders arrive with different expectations. They see the roads and turn them into questions. Some imagine a lost kingdom. Some attribute the work to a people larger, wiser, or stranger than ordinary humans. Some assume the builders must have possessed tools or knowledge far beyond what archaeology supports. This is a familiar pattern in the history of ruins. When later observers cannot see the society that built something impressive, they sometimes underestimate the humans who did. The unsupported theories are dramatic, but they often reveal more about modern disbelief than ancient capability. Archaeologists approach more slowly. They measure alignments, map surfaces, compare artifacts, study erosion, examine nearby settlements, and ask how the roads fit into wider patterns of life. The work is patient because the roads do not explain themselves. A straight line may be practical, sacred, political, or all three. A reused section may contain evidence from centuries apart. A marker may belong to the original builders or later travellers. The evidence remains incomplete. But every survey makes the vanished world less empty. One lesser-known detail is that roads can become invisible precisely because they are so simple. A wall calls attention to itself. A pyramid cannot hide easily. But a road may look like a natural clearing, a pale strip, a terrace, a dry channel, or a modern track. Some ancient routes were only recognized fully when seen from above, through aerial photography, satellite imagery, or careful landscape survey. From the ground, they can disappear into familiarity. The builders made lines meant to be walked, not necessarily admired. As modern eyes rediscover them, the roads regain a strange authority. They prove that the vanished people were not marginal wanderers drifting without structure. They planned, coordinated, remembered, and invested labour in a future they expected to continue. Even when their names are uncertain, their decisions remain legible. The roads become a form of testimony, not written in language, but in direction. The legacy is therefore double. On one hand, the roads are evidence of loss, empty lines leading through a landscape where the original social world has dissolved. On the other, they are evidence of achievement, a people turning distance into order with the tools, beliefs, and labour available to them. They show that civilization is not measured only by palaces or texts. Sometimes it is measured by the ability to make separate places belong to one another. By the time later generations inherit the landscape, the roads no longer carry one meaning. They are ruins, resources, riddles, and roots. They belong to the builders, to the survivors, to those who reused them, and to those who study them. Their silence is not simple emptiness. It is the layered silence of many worlds passing over the same ground, each one leaving just enough for the next to misunderstand. The perfect roads could not save the world that made them. That is the final weight of the story, and it is heavier than any simple mystery. The builders had solved one of the oldest human problems, how to cross distance without being defeated by it. They had turned memory into direction, direction into labour, and labour into a landscape of connection. They had made the hard earth carry their intentions, yet no road, however straight, can guarantee rain. No network can preserve trust forever. No line across the land can stop a society from changing until it no longer recognizes the map it inherited. Their disappearance is not a failure of intelligence. It is a reminder that civilizations are not held together by engineering alone. Roads need water points, maintenance crews, safe passage, shared belief, reliable destinations, and people willing to keep walking. Once those conditions begin to fail, the road becomes less a tool than a relic in waiting. It may still be beautifully made, it may still point with absolute certainty, but certainty in stone means little when the human world around it has lost the ability to answer. What remains is the contradiction that makes the vanished builders so haunting. They were organized enough to leave marks that endured, yet vulnerable enough to disappear from clear memory. They were not primitive shadows before history. They were planners, workers, travelers, ritual participants, parents, farmers, traders, mourners, and survivors. Some may have died in crisis. Some may have fled. Some may have been absorbed into neighbouring peoples. Some may have returned for a while to old places before the roads finally fell silent. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the balance of causes. But the broad lesson is difficult to avoid. A civilization can be real, complex, and capable, and still become almost invisible. The roads ask for humility. They warn against imagining that permanence belongs to those who build impressively. Human systems are more fragile than their monuments. A wall may outlast the language spoken beside it. A road may outlast the society that maintained it. A city may lose its people long before its stones collapse. The builders trusted continuity enough to invest in long routes across a harsh world. That trust was not foolish. For generations, it worked. The tragedy is that even successful answers can expire when the questions change. And so the road becomes a message without words. It says that people were here. It says they knew where they were going. It says they believed the journey would be repeated. Then the message breaks off. The line continues across the earth, but the voices do not. In the end, perfect roads cannot save a civilization from drought, fear, hunger, conflict, forgetting, or time. But they can preserve the shape of a vanished confidence. They can show us, long after the last traveller has gone, that someone once looked across an unforgiving landscape and decided it could be connected. That decision remains, pale and stubborn in the dust, even when almost everything else has disappeared. The wind moves over the old road now with no memory of the hands that cleared it. It crosses the same stones, the same dry channels, the same open distances, but it carries no messages, no offerings, no footsteps returning from distant settlements. The land has become quiet again. All seems quiet to those who do not know how to read it. Yet beneath that quiet is the shape of human intention, still present after names, songs, and ceremonies have fallen away. Every lost civilization leaves behind a different kind of silence. Some leave toppled statues, some leave buried cities, some leave bones in caves, seeds in ash, ships under silt, or tablets in broken rooms. This people left lines. Their legacy is not a single monument rising above the horizon, but a way through the horizon itself. They remind us that history is not only made by those who conquer, write, and rule. It is also made by those who connect, maintain, carry, repair, and walk. Perhaps their descendants survived elsewhere. Perhaps their old identity dissolves slowly into other communities. Perhaps some memory of the roads lived for a time in stories told beside other fires, until even those stories changed. What matters now is that the roads remain as proof that disappearance is rarely emptiness. It is transformation, loss, survival, and forgetting woven together until the original pattern can barely be seen. So the final image is simple, a road across a hard landscape, straight enough to feel deliberate, lonely enough to feel impossible. It leads toward a place that once mattered. It passes through ground once known by heart. It holds the last visible gesture of a people who tried to make distance obey them, and for a long time succeeded. Then the walkers thinned, the repairs stopped, the settlements emptied, and the road became what it is now, a question stretched across the earth.